Imagine discovering a hidden rhythm that governs everything around you: wars, weather, stock markets, even your own emotions, and realizing that these patterns could help you predict the future. Cycles, the mysterious forces that trigger events, was written by Edward R. Dewey with contributions from Mandino, and it dives into this fascinating idea. First published in 1971, the book came out during a time when people were eager to understand the forces behind major events, like economic crashes and natural disasters. Dewey, an American economist who once worked for the U.S. government, spent decades studying cycles, trying to uncover why things happen when they do. He founded the foundation for the study of cycles, and this book is the result of his lifelong quest to show that life isn't as random as it seems. Instead, he argues that recurring patterns, or cycles, influence everything in the universe, from the smallest creatures to the largest historical events, and understanding them could change how we live. Dewey starts by taking us back to the 1930s, when he was working as the chief economic analyst for the U.S. Department of Commerce. President Herbert Hoover had given him a big task: figure out why the Great Depression happened and why the stock market crashed so badly in 1929. At the time, the country was in chaos. People were losing jobs, businesses were failing, and no one seemed to have a clear answer. Dewey went around asking experts from all kinds of fields, like economics and history, hoping to find a reason. But what struck him was how everyone had a different explanation. It felt like going to different doctors and getting completely different diagnoses for the same illness. Frustrated, he kept searching until a friend mentioned something intriguing. There might be a kind of consistency in how prices move over time, almost like they follow a rhythm. This idea grabbed Dewey's attention, and he decided to dig deeper. He started looking at price movements in the stock market, studying old records to see if there was a pattern. What he found was surprising. Prices didn't just go up and down randomly, they seemed to follow a cycle, repeating every few years. But Dewey didn't stop there. He began to wonder if this rhythm applied to other things too, not just money. Could there be cycles in nature, in animals, in human behavior? He spent the next 30 years researching, collecting data from all over the world, and this book is where he shares what he discovered. One of the first things Dewey talks about is how cycles show up everywhere, even in places you wouldn't expect. He gives examples that make you stop and think. For instance, he found that the population of snowshoe rabbits in Canada goes up and down every 9.6 years, almost like clockwork. At the same time, the number of lynx, which are animals that hunt rabbits, follows the same pattern, peaking and falling every 9.6 years. It's not just animals, though. Heart disease cases in the northeastern United States rise and fall on that same 9.6-year cycle. Even the amount of wheat harvested in the U.S. seems to match this rhythm. But then Dewey throws in a twist. Grasshopper outbreaks happen every 9.2 years, and mouse plagues come every 4 years, often around U.S. presidential election years. Why the difference? He doesn't have all the answers, but he makes it clear that these patterns aren't random. As Dewey keeps going, he shows how cycles affect more than just nature. He looks at human history and finds that even big events like wars seem to follow a rhythm. He studied records of international battles and noticed that they tend to spike every 9.6 years, just like the rabbit populations. He also found cycles in things like church membership. People join churches in waves, not all at once. Even the stock market, which he started with, follows these patterns, with prices often dipping at the same points in a cycle. Dewey points out that this isn't just about numbers, it's about real life. When the stock market crashes, people lose jobs, families struggle, and entire countries can feel the impact. If we could predict these dips, maybe we could prepare better or even stop them from happening. But why do these cycles exist? That's the big question Dewey tries to tackle next. He admits he doesn't have all the answers, but he has some ideas. He thinks there might be forces in the environment, things we can't always see, that influence everything on Earth. For example, he looks at the sun and its sunspots, which are bursts of energy that happen on an 11-year cycle. Scientists have noticed that when sunspots are at their peak, The weather on Earth changes. There might be more storms or hotter summers. Dewey wonders if these solar cycles could also affect people, maybe making us more emotional or aggressive, which could explain why wars often happen at certain times. He also talks about other forces, like magnetic waves or even the position of planets. But he's careful to say these are just theories, not proven facts. One of the most interesting parts of the book is when Dewey talks about cycles in human behavior. He says that even our emotions seem to follow a rhythm. For example, men's moods go up and down in cycles, and so do things like industrial accidents, where people get hurt at work. He found that the number of babies born each day changes in a pattern, and even diseases like cancer seem to come back at regular intervals. It's a bit unsettling to think about, because it makes you wonder how much control we really have over our lives. Are we just being pulled along by these invisible forces, like puppets on a string? Dewey doesn't think it's that simple, but he does believe that understanding these cycles could help us make better choices. As the book goes on, Dewey shares more examples to show just how wide-ranging these cycles are. He talks about pine cones, which grow more in certain years, following a rhythm. He mentions how the levels of lakes and rivers rise and fall in cycles, and even glaciers melt in a predictable pattern. It's not just nature, though. Human creations follow cycles too. The price of things like cotton or steel goes up and down in waves, and so do the sales of companies. Even the way people dress, like fashion trends, seems to change in a cycle. Dewey found that advertising works better at certain times, and political events like big election wins often happen in a rhythm. It's almost as if the whole world is dancing to the same beat, even if we don't always hear the music. Dewey also brings in some history to make his point. He talks about how scientists in other fields like biology and astronomy have noticed cycles too. For example, earthquakes happen more often at certain intervals, and so do things like radio waves from stars. He mentions researchers who studied tree rings, which show how old a tree is, and found that the rings grow thicker or thinner in a cycle, depending on the weather. All these examples add up to one big idea. Cycles are everywhere, and they've been happening for a long time, maybe even forever. Dewey thinks that if we can learn to spot these patterns, we might be able to predict things like economic crashes, wars, or even natural disasters. But Dewey is honest about the challenges. He says that studying cycles isn't easy because the data isn't always perfect. Sometimes a cycle might seem to disappear for a while, or two cycles might overlap, making things messy. He also admits that not everyone agrees with him. Some scientists think he's looking too hard for patterns, seeing things that aren't really there. Dewey compares this to how people used to think the Earth was flat. It took time for new ideas to be accepted. He believes that cycles are real, but he knows it'll take more work to prove it to everyone. That's why he started the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, to keep researching and collecting data. Towards the end of the book, Dewey gets a bit more personal. He talks about how understanding cycles could change our lives. If we knew when a depression was coming, we could save money or make better decisions. If we knew when wars were more likely, maybe we could work harder to stop them. He even thinks cycles could help us understand ourselves better, like knowing when we might feel more emotional or creative. But he's careful not to promise too much. He says that cycles don't control everything, they're just one part of life. We still have the power to make choices, but knowing these rhythms can give us an edge, like knowing the weather before you go outside. The book wraps up with a look at the bigger picture. Dewey believes that cycles are a kind of natural law, like gravity, that we're just starting to understand. He thinks that if we keep studying them, we might unlock some of the universe's greatest mysteries, like why things happen when they do. It's a hopeful idea, even if it's a bit unsettling to think we're all part of these bigger patterns. Cycles, the mysterious forces that trigger events, is a thought-provoking book because it challenges us to see the world in a new way, making us wonder if there's a hidden rhythm behind everything we do. It shows how connected everything is, from the smallest animals to the biggest events, reminding us that we're all part of something much larger. The The book also pushes us to think about predictability. Could we really know the future if we understood these cycles, or are we just fooling ourselves? People are drawn to this book because it's both fascinating and a bit mysterious, blending science with a sense of wonder, and encouraging us to look for patterns in our own lives while questioning how much control we truly have.